Thank you for coming. I would like to, first of all, thank the Friends of the Martin County Library System for presenting the Chautauqua South program today. It's with their support that we're able to have all this wonderful programming. They do it throughout the year, but the Chautauqua series going from January through April is our big season. And they do a phenomenal job fundraising for us. And if you would like to support our friends, there's a couple of ways you can do it. The first way is by joining the Friends, which is fantastic. You can go to the Friends Book Depot in the B&A Flea Market and purchase some of their gently read books. And another cool thing is if you like to pass it forward, when you're done with those books, donate them back to the Friends so that they can sell them to somebody else. They do a lot of revenue for us, and they've been just phenomenal on how they've helped the library through the 20 some odd years that I've worked here. So support your friends so that these programs always be here to entertain you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure here to introduce to you Dr. Anna Darrow.
Oh, well, I want to thank you all for inviting me tonight. It's truly my pleasure to be here. As you said, my name is Dr. Anna Albertina Lindstedt Darrow, and I have to tell you, I'm quite honored, appreciate being invited to reminisce a little bit about what my life was like as a pioneering female physician on the Florida frontiers. What do you know? I was only the second woman ever licensed to practice medicine here in the state of Florida. It's true. Now, oftentimes, I was called a trailblazer, and well, I had to quite literally live up to that name. It's true. And when we first moved down to the Glades, oftentimes I had to make a trail just in order to see where to get to where I was needed. It's true. Well, you know, when I think back, I think that the 10 years or so that we lived in the Glades was, well, in retrospect, amongst the happiest and certainly most colorful of my 47 years as a physician. I had to cope with things that medical books and lectures do not teach. It's true. Every moment could present new challenges. You never knew what we were going to find. While the Glades alone, the mosquitoes were enough to drive men and mules mad. It's true. But they were also incredibly lush, beautiful, just outstanding. Oh, there were birds and animals, and well, there were plants that were just, as I said, outstanding. Oh, if you've never heard the roar of a bull alligator and some nightmare dancer, well, you just haven't lived. You just haven't lived. Along with being called a trailblazer, of course, I've been called many other things as well. Let me see. Been called Swamp Doctor. Some of you have heard that before. Or Squaw Doctor for my work with the Cow Creek Indians, the Seminole Indians. Well, even Petticoat Doctor of the Everglades, people called me. Truth to tell, I've been called a lot of things in my life. Only some of which I can repeat in polite company, mind you. I think that comes with being a trailblazer. The Cracker folk up around the lake, or around Lake Okeechobee, usually just call me Doc Anner. Well, even called my husband, Roy, Mr. Doc Anner. I'm actually a dozen other things along with being a general practitioner. And in addition to being a physician, of course, I'm also wife, mother, artist, pharmacist, while even veterinarian when called upon. I think I'm really sort of a mother confessor much of the time. It's true. Folk come to me for advice on everything from getting divorces and their wayward children and goodness knows what else. You just never know where life is going to take you, do you? I have been asked time and time again, or told that my life was so interesting that I should write a book. Well, if I were to write a book, I guess I would have to start when I was born in Jasper, Indiana. That would be the first chapter, 1876. That's right. I was born in Jasper, Indiana. My parents had both migrated from Sweden, and we lived. Well, they lived there in Chicago first, and then they moved to Jasper, Indiana, before I was born. Obviously, you see. Does anybody remember the Great Fire, the fire of 1871, the fire there in Chicago? Well, my parents were living there then, and in fact, my father was a coppersmith, and he was tasked. My brother's still a plumber, fine plumber, there in Chicago, and my father was tasked to actually redo the waterworks there in Chicago. And I guess they had had enough after that that they decided to move out to the country, and they moved to Jasper, Indiana. And we lived there until I was 13 years of age. And then we moved back. We moved back to the city of Chicago. Well, I moved for the first time. And oh, I think I have a picture of myself there. I'm trying to get used to all of these things. Pardon me as we start to do this a little bit. There we go. You'll see me. There I am. See, that's about when I moved back to Chicago, Illinois, and it was there in Chicago. I have to tell you that I took up painting. They had classes in art, and well, even as a child, I had the gift of good hand control measurements, color consideration, and what I consider most important, the desire to preserve everything beautiful. Uh, In fact, I'll tell you, I was really quite honored when, and I was still in high school, mind you, two, two of my drawings were selected to be exhibited at the Chicago World's Fair. That was 1893. Does anybody here remember the Columbian Exposition? Oh, it was something. Oh, it was something. Oh, by the way, my two drawings were the only ones from the entire North Division high schools. It's true. It's true. Okay. After high school, I went on to a business college, and it was there in business college that I met Charles Roy Darrow, the man, well, the man who has become my partner, and uh, well, and my husband. We wed on my 20th birthday, 17 1896, September 16th, my birthday, 1896. I think I have a picture of my wedding too. I have to learn how to do all of these things. I have to tell you, oh, there I that was me. In fact, later on, it was, of course, it was black and white. Somebody asked me about that the other day. But my daughter-in-law, Babe, we called her Babe, little Ruthie. She painted it for me. She used to hand color all of those things. And it was Dickie's first wife. Okay, well, after business college, Roy and I moved to Long Beach, California, where Roy got a job as a bank teller. And in fact, that's where our son was born the following summer, June 1897. And from there, we went on to Ogden, Utah. And we started, I think I have a picture. Let me see that again. I have a picture of them as well. Uh, there you can see it. There's Charles Roy, my husband, and little Richard, little Dickie, isn't he something? And me when we were living in Ogden, Utah. Now it was there we started our own business, a retail business, selling, used pieces of furniture. You see, Roy would buy up used pieces of furniture. I guess you'd call them antiques nowadays, old furniture, and I would refinish them. And we did well enough. We did. Well, to be honest, it was not something that totally fulfilled the yearnings of my soul, but we did okay. We did, and in fact, while we were there in Ogden, Utah, I'm gonna take this picture down now. I'm sorry. While we were there in Ogden, Utah, there was an art teacher there who bought up a bedroom suite from us. And unfortunately, she fell on some hard times and was unable to finish paying for it. So we made an understanding. She would give me lessons in oil painting, and we would forgive the debt, and so it would be settled. I have to tell you, painting has been an appreciation and joy and drawing that has lasted all my life. Even as a child, as I said in Chicago, I had the gift of good hand control measurements, and painting with oil. Well, In fact, you can see some of the paintings. I just, here's my dog, Ace. I just did finish that. It's my latest one, and here's one that I made for a friend, Adelaide Rawlison. I'm going to be giving it for her as a birthday present. That's right. Well, okay. So we were in Ogden, Utah, and our lives changed in a way. Well, I don't think either Roy or I could have ever imagined. It was towards the very end of 1902. And Roy was away on a business trip. Little Dickie was about 5 years old, and I was expecting again. In fact, I was about 8 months along, and when I took ill. Now, as I said, Roy was away in Idaho on a business trip, and I took quite ill, seriously ill. The doctors, well, they just didn't know. They didn't know what it was at first. At first, they said, "Oh, it's just the grip. You'll get over it. It's just the grip." But they blamed everything on the grip. But as my condition worsened, they sent word to Roy that if he ever wanted to see me alive again, he better hurry home as quick as he can. Well, you can just imagine. You can imagine. By the time he got home, well, he was absolutely exhausted and terrified. But luckily, I was just beginning to recuperate a little bit. Though I will admit I was still weak, but I remember that night. Roy and I both rested and we started to talk. I'll tell you, there's nothing quite looking death right in the eye to get you to talk about what's truly important. hmm I remember we talked about our fears and our frustrations. And we talked about our hopes and desires. Well, and our dreams. As a matter of fact, we started to speak about things that we had never said aloud to anyone. It's true. I remember I turned to Roy and said, "Roy, I'd give anything in the world to understand what's the matter with people and become a medical doctor." And he looked at me, he said, "Well, hell, gal, that's what I've wanted to do all my life." We had both always secretly dreamt it, but never spoken about it aloud. And we vowed that night that surviving whatever this illness was, that once I was better and stronger, we would sell the furniture business, start over, and both of us enroll in medical school. And we did. We did just that. By January of 1903, we had sold the business and enrolled in Dr. Still's brand new school of osteopathy there in Kirksville, Missouri. Now, to be perfectly honest, well, one of the reasons we went there, it was the only medical school we were familiar with. We had sold them some of their furniture. But of course, you also must understand that there weren't terribly many places where we could study medicine together. Roy and I wanted to study medicine together, and Dr. Andrew Still, he believed that both men and women could and should practice medicine. It's true. I remember, I think, well, I I think that a lot of the people, like certain Harvard professors that I can think of, I'm sorry, it still upsets me to think about. There was a Professor Edward H. Clark. I remember this Harvard professor who was telling everybody, he proclaimed that women seeking advanced education would develop, and I'm going to quote him now, mind you. I'm going to quote him that they would develop um, what was it? Oh, monstrous brains, um, and what was it he said again? I'm sorry, I can't remember the way I used to remember things. Um, oh yes, monstrous brains and weak digestive systems. Well, I have to tell you, I have never ever been had a problem with my digestive system. I truly believe that it was not so much that they were convinced that women could not be instructed in medicine, but rather an intense dislike to the idea that they should be so capable. It's true. It's true. I think that that's exactly what it is. Well, okay. From Kirksville, oh, by the way, Roy did get to start 3 weeks earlier than I did. And you see, I had to wait to give birth to our daughter Dolly in February 2nd. But I graduated along with Roy in 2 years, head of the class, don't you know? Okay. From Kirksville, we went on to Chicago and we got our medical degrees at the Chicago College of Medicine and Surgery. Well, some of you now know it as Loyola University. Oh, I think there's a picture here. Let me see. When we went back to Chicago. Uh, that's right. Oh, there it is. Look at that snow. That was our house there in Chicago. And uh, while we were there in Chicago, that's where our families were. So it was nice to be back there, anyways. Oh, there's Dolly and Dickie. That was 1907. Now, I have to tell you, to the surprise of many, they were not much accustomed to seeing a woman in medical schools. I did quite well in my studies. I have always believed that the study of art has helped me in my work, not only in my studies, but as a physician. See, the eye is a great teacher. The ear may forget, but the eye knows exactly. And especially when you put the two of them together. My patients always know just where their ailments are if you take the time to listen. And so the first step in confidence in the cure of an ill body is taken. Well, I'll have you know, I practiced medicine for 12 years, 12 years before I ever had to uh, sign a death certificate. Oh, I meant to show you one more picture when we graduated. That's right. By the way, we also got our pharmacological licenses. Oh, there's my husband Roy and myself. We also got our pharmacological licenses were there. Now, I graduated as a general practitioner with honors, by the by, in 1909. And Roy went on to become an otolaryngologist, an ear, nose, and throat specialist. That's right. Okay. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I know I have, it's been a long life and a lot of stories, but I remember it was there before we graduated. It was about 19, I think it was the winter of 1908. Well, Roy was on staff at the Cook County Hospital there in Chicago, and he got a bad case of la grippe. Well, the flu, I guess you would call it, and unfortunately, it damaged his heart. It weakened his heart, and so we decided that when we finished all of our studies, we would look for a warmer, more salubrious climate. Oh, salubrious. Now there's a $10 word, as my daughter Dolly would say, salubrious. Well, but it's true. If any of you have ever experienced those winters up in Chicago, you know that it can be awfully harsh, awfully harsh. Well, we were thinking about going back to California again, but Roy had a patient, a Mr. Lewis Larson. He was a Northwest passenger agent for Mr. Henry Flagler's Florida East Coast Railroad, and he talked to us about all the opportunities in Florida. In fact, uh, we went down. In fact, I had the thing in right after graduation, after I graduated in 1909, to take the medical boards there in Florida. And I think, by the way, I was only the second woman, as I stated earlier, ever to pass the medical boards in Florida. And I did so by the highest average of anyone, a general average of 98% plus on all parts of the medical examination. I'll never forget. There was Dr. Fernandez. Dr. Fernandez was the head of the medical examiners at that time. And he said, well, when he saw that examination, he said he could not wait. He could not wait to meet the young man, the young doctor who had taken it and had a general average of 98% plus in all the subjects. He said he couldn't wait to meet that young man and shake his hand. Well, you can imagine his surprise when he came out and it turned out to be me. But I will tell you, he did shake my hand. In fact, he told that story and laughed about it for years after. But while we were there, we also, oh, where is that? Uh, Went over to St. Augustine. Have you ever been to St. Augustine? We went to our very first orange grove. There you can see me. There I am on that little rickety ladder, and there's Roy. And I have to tell you, mm, it only reinforced our decisions to move to Florida. Oh, the aroma, it was something. It was just absolutely beautiful. Well, okay. Uh, It was just lovely. It, as I said, it reinforced our decision. So when we finished things up there in Chicago, and after Roy got his specialty, we moved down permanently here to Florida in 1911. We moved over to Jacksonville. It was Roy and myself and little Grandma Darrow. We called her Little Grandma, and of course our children, Dickie and Dolly, almost 9. Well, she was only 8.5, but she insisted that she was almost 9. She told everybody. Oh, and of course Peter too. I almost forgot Peter. He was our cat, our Maltese cat. Oh yeah, we always had pets. We can see this is the painting I just did of our pet Ace. Isn't he something? Yeah. We've always had pets, cats or dogs. Oh, in fact, we even had a pet goose once. It's true. We had a pet goose. It when we lived over in Okeechobee, it was a watch goose. Oh, there you can see. There's a picture. Oh, there's little grandma that we called her little Grandma Darrow. That's what my wonderful mother-in-law, Emma Darrow, and my mother, Emma Lynchstead, Big Grandma. That's how the kids called her, Little Grandma, Big Grandma. And then, as I said, we always had pets. We had dogs and cats. And in the middle, you see Roy. Roy is there with our pet goose. It was a watch goose, except we had to finally get rid of it. It attacked friend and foe alike. We just did, what else could we do with it? Well, okay. So we were there in Jacksonville and we were just setting up practice, and it was the same, not too much different than was in Chicago. But while we were there, um, we met with Mr. James Ingram, and he came and he wanted Roy to become the railroad surgeon, the official physician for all the railroad workers. They were starting to build a spur line to Tanti. Well, what they changed the name to Okeechobee. They didn't think that was an important enough name, and they were going to build this new spur line, and they had high hopes for it. They expected it was going to become the new Miami or Palm Beach or such. In fact, at one point, well, this was a few years later, there's even talk it that it could possibly become the new state capital and replace Tallahassee, it being more centrally located and everything. Well, in addition to the job, they offered us a small parcel of land where we could build an office building or drugstore or what have you. And that's what Roy had always wanted. So we agreed. Now, before we left Jacksonville, we bought ourselves a brand new brass bound high spoke wheel Model T Ford. But truth be told, well, neither Roy nor I had any idea how to drive a motor car. It's different from a horse and buggy if you haven't done it. So Mr. Henry Ford, he sent a driver down until we learned how to drive it. I don't think they do that anymore. You see, you had to put it in low gear to make the lights work. They ran on the magneto, you see, and you had to put it in low gear if you wanted to see anything in the dark. In fact, it was several years before we got Presto lights with a Presto light tank on the side. In fact, here's a picture of our car. You'll see it. There we go. You'll see there we had Dolly and of course Roy, myself. You'll see in the back. You'll see Dickie and both grandmas, Big Grandma and Little Grandma. Well, oh, and Peter the cat. You don't see him in this picture, but he came with us too. Now, Peter the cat and little grandma and I, we went over by rail over to Fort Pierce, while Roy and Dolly and Dickie drove. I have to tell you, that's one way to break it in. There were parts that were underwater going across the flats. The water was so high, Dickie had to lean over and lie on the top of it and just scoop up water that he could just bend down and get and refill the radiator so it wouldn't get so hot. They also learned some tricks that, well, has been serving us quite well ever since. Like, for example, if ever any of you ever find yourself driving through sand and scrub, remember this, it could come in very handy. What you do is you cut down palm fronds and things, just cut down all the leaves, the palm fronds, and you put them under the front wheels for traction whenever you're driving through sand and scrub. Otherwise, you'll get stuck. The wheels will just dig in, they'll spin and dig in deeper and deeper. Well, the car didn't make it over for another 6 months. It stayed over in Fort Pierce, but eventually we did. We all made it over to Tanti, well, Okeechobee. And I have to say, when we first got there, it had the reputation of being the wildest settlement east of the Mississippi. well deserved, I might add. Well, in fact, let me see. Oh, there. It was surrounded by cow camps on the north, sawmills on the east, and of course, the catfish camps all around the lake. They said that 9/10 of the white population was on the dodge from some place or somebody. And I don't doubt it for a minute. Oftentimes in filling out a birth certificate, and I asked where the parents were born, the answer was simply to write unknown and stop asking questions. Oh, we met all kinds, including some, well, some of the some of the finest families it's ever been my pleasure to know. Oh, I think I have there the Rollersons. This was the very first house ever built in Okeechobee. Well, by Peter Rollerson. You can see the sugar mill over on the right. Now the Rollersons, I'm still friends with many of them. Were the very first, in fact, Peter Rollerson. He was the very first mayor when we incorporated in 1915. It's true. I think appropriately so. And my husband, Dr. Charles Roy Darrow, was president of the land, the realty company, and also I mean the business, and also lots of he was also one of the very first city councilmen. Now, um, when the railroad came in 1915, oh, all of the catfish activities were centered over there. They no longer had to send all the fish on down to the New River Canal down to Fort Lauderdale and then go back up by those trains. The TA bass fisheries have still moved them up there. Well, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself again. I was talking about meeting the Rollersons. Well, the very first time was Will Rollerson. We hadn't been there very long. All we had built was a little shotgun shack. You know what a shotgun shack is? Oh, that just means that you can open the front door and open the back door and shoot a shotgun right through it. Not hit anything because there's no walls in between. Well, that's about all we had built at that time. And remember, I told you this was rough country. We heard the reputation, and I remember we hadn't been there long, and we were both already abed, and we heard a banging, a pounding on the door, late one night, and the man was calling out, "Dog, dog." Well, as I said, it was a rough community, and Roy didn't want to answer it. But I guess I just didn't have enough sense to be scared. So I went to the window and I called out, "Well, what do you want?" And a man answered. He said, "Well, I'm Will Rollerson, and my shoat's real sick. It's having convulsions." Now, I'd grown up on a farm and everything. That'd been a long time before, and I wasn't quite used to the way that the cracker folk talk or did things. They do things quite different. So I thought he was talking about a baby. Maybe it was a cracker term for baby or something. So I called out, "Well, how old is the baby?" And he said, "Oh, the litter's new. This one's gotten to the cane skimmings and is drunk with spasms, gotten to the moonshine." I remember I turned to Roy and I said, "Roy, it's his little piggy. He's gotten into the moonshine and he has convulsions." And Roy looked at me and he said, "Well, hell gal, what does he think we are? Vets?" But no matter, I did not want to refuse our first, well, professional call of any kind in our new home. So I called back out, "Well, how much do you think the little piggy weighs?" And when he told me, I went over to my pharmacological case, the very one that Dr. Abbott had given me upon graduation. You, you've heard about Abbott Laboratories, maybe? Well, Dr. Abbott, I was pleased to get to know, and he gave both Roy and myself wonderful pharmacological cases. They were like a traveling drugstore. I carried it everywhere, and uh, and I gave Will Rawlison, Abbott's combination for colic, and told him how to give it to the little piggy. Well, I have to tell you, the show lived, and our reputation and a great friendship was made. In fact, he eventually married uh, uh, one of the best midwives, Aunt Merida, one of the best midwives it's ever been my pleasure to work with. Well, okay. Um, But things were changing. I want to show one more picture with it. When in 1915, I started getting a little ahead of myself, but here we go. In 1915, Roy's dream of a two-story office building and drugstore finally came to be. In fact, we built it just adjoining Rawlinson's department store. And that, oh, by the way, that was still the same year. You can see the picture right there that the first train came into Okeechobee. That's right. And it was also the very same year that we incorporated. But I have to tell you, building that part pharmacy, that drugstore and office building, well, it proved to be more of a challenge than we could ever have imagined. I mean, we had been saving money and putting it away for several years now. And of course, Roy finally had enough. The train had come in, and now he had ordered all the building materials, had all the plans for it, all the bricks and such, and ordered all the materials. When our bank over in Jacksonville failed, hmm and with it went our money, all our money. Well, Roy went over to Jacksonville and he spoke with James Ingram again, that Mr. James Ingram I was speaking of earlier. And he went and borrowed $5,000 from him. Personal loan, $5,000. Well, I know it's a lot of money, but I want you to know we paid back every last penny as quickly as we could. For though I'll tell you, for a long time we lived on bacon and grits. Oh, we did. And anytime any of the children wanted any kind of spending money, we would say, "No, I'm sorry, it's not our money." He would say, "It's not our money, it's Mr. Ingram's." And if they wanted any kind of extra spending money, well, they would have to find some way to earn it. And I don't think it did them any harm, I have to tell you. Well, okay. In the back of that pharmacy in the drugstore, it was where our first courthouse was held. Well, it was there in the offices that we had in back. That's where Judge Henry Hancock held court. And then the other part we also rented out to the Schwartz brothers for a garage. That's where our first, in fact, they used to make the very first movie house there too, outside. They put a screen up outside and they'd run a wire all the way across to one of the motors. And when the car broke down, they'd have to wait until they could get it started again to see the rest of the film. Well, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself there too. In fact, by the way, if we have time, if you want to know, in that courthouse, we saw some things like Pogey Bill. Oh, he was quite a character. See, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. If we have time later, ask me. We saw a lot of things going on about that one. Well, Roy, I wanted to show this picture too. Roy, he took care of the office practice. He did. Uh, he took care of the office practice, taking care of getting fitting glasses, pulling teeth, minor surgeries of all kinds. And I remember 50 cents a tooth. That was until he finally got a dentist. And of course, fixing plenty of broken bones to set, many of them caused by those old Ford cars. When you cranked them up, you had to be careful, and tonsillectomies and opening boils and such, and minor surgeries like amputations, tonsillectomies, and things. And of course, he could be kept busy by cleaning up the slashes and cutting out catfish fins. All the fishermen all around the lake, they always went around barefoot. And the side fins of those catfish, well, they're especially infectious. And oftentimes septicemia was set in where the foot was punctured. Oh, and folk would come in with wounds stuffed with all kinds of old felt hats and cobwebs, all kinds of things to stop the bleeding. I'll tell you, the old felt hat remedy caused some terrible, terrible bad infections. But surprisingly, the cobwebs did not. But believe you me, both were messes to clean up. Well, okay, as for me, I took care of the outside practice. I would go wherever I was needed. I went to the farthest fish or cow camp, from Fort Drum to Bassinger, out to Indiantown, Hungryland, or Bluefield. I went at all hours, braving swamplands, alligators, and rattlesnakes, and some of the most dangerous outlaw gangs this state or any other has ever seen. Yeah, including the Ashley gang. Some of you remember there in Stewart. Wow. Uh, and I went very simply in order to take care of people, to um, heal the sick, nurse the wounded. Oh, and of course, deliver babies. Oh, and I went at any hour, whenever I was called upon. I'm proud to say I have never refused to go when called upon. Oftentimes, I went on either on horseback or that Model T or that sometimes in a buggy, push pole canoe, or motorboat or on foot. If I was needed, I went. People knew when I was coming. Well, especially if I was on horseback or that horse and buggy. You see, our horse, old Jim, he had been hit by a train down there in West Palm, and he had a bad hit, but we got him real cheap. And he had a kind of a rolling gait. You see, I had fixed up a bullseye lantern on the dash of the buggy so that we could watch out for, for stumps and bull holes and things. Well, bull holes, that's what the cracker's called, the term for those holes where all the cattle try to paw out and, get rid of those ticks all over them. But old Jim, with his bad hip, he kind of had a crazy trotter, like rolling gait that was easily recognized. People could see me coming along the way. Now, Roy, Roy charged $1 an office visit, while I charged $1 a mile. Oh, and $10 for delivering a baby. Though eventually I had to raise that to $25 per delivery. Oh, except for the Seminole Indians, the Cow Creek Indians. No, I never charged them. Never charged them a penny. You see, I'll show you a picture of them. There you go. There's Billy Bowlegs and some of the other ones there. That there is in front of our house. Both of those there. Now, Billy Bowlegs, I know. People say, well, you didn't charge him. That's not the white man's way. But you see, it wasn't theirs and it wasn't mine. And I think it all started when Billy Bowlings came in one time, and he brought in a 4-year-old little boy that I diagnosed with acute pericarditis. That's right. I remember I let them listen to my heart first with the stethoscope and then to the child's. And I when he heard it, Billy Bowlings, he turned to me, said that the boy was going to die before sunup. And I remember I looked at him and said, the boy will not die if you do what I say. And to my surprise, they did everything I asked. I asked them if they would camp over there by Judge Hancock's place and bring the boy in every day for a while. And they did. They did everything I asked, including some of the treatment at home and such. And I remember it was about 5 years later, they brought the boy back. And when I examined him, I'm pleased to tell you that I found his heart to be in good condition. And he was just, he seemed a normal, healthy child. Well, after a while, they accepted me. They accepted me just like as one of their own. In fact, they gave me, you can see there in the picture, a gift, the beads like the women wear around their neck, just same as their woman wore. They gave me that. And that's how people started calling me Squaw Doctor. It's true. And well, I never charged them a penny. They oftentimes repaid us with gifts. They would bring in venison and wild turkey and huckleberries. And in fact, one time, I remember we had a trip planned over to go over to Fort Pierce. Oh, Dolly was so excited. And when the Cow Creek Indians stopped by and they brought us over 25 quarts of huckleberries. Well, we had to can them right away or they'd all go spoil, they all go bad. And Dolly was not happy about the delay. She was not happy about that delay. Well, okay. Now, some of the Indians, like Billy Bowlegs and Chief Billy Smith, they spoke a little bit of English, but oftentimes I did not speak their language, and oftentimes I just had to give them instructions in a form of like sign language. Mostly I just treated them for common things like malaria and hookworm and tonsillitis and those ubiquitous Florida sores that they often got from those sharp saw-like palmettos. Oh, they could get little infections there. Now, uh, sometimes we just have to learn people's ways and they have to get a chance to learn ours. Certainly that's what happened with the cracker folk. That's right. You see, I remember one of the first things I learned was, this little trick that they had, that the cracker folk had, that If I had they had a $2 charge, they would give me a $50 bill. And if I couldn't make the change, well, and take the payment when they offered it, they just thought it naturally canceled the debt. Hmm. Well, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Didn't take me long to learn. I began to carry $100 worth of bills stuffed into all my pillboxes. It's true. You know, as a country doctor, I've learned how important it is to be open to new ways of doing things, be ready for anything. A country doctor must know how to change tires at 4 a.m. and in the freezing rain, be able to set a fractured femur with a piece of string and a flat iron and get just as good as a result as the mechanical engineering staff at the city hospital at 10% their fee, of course. Be willing to drive through 10 miles of mud to minister to the child of a drunkard. Uh, a country doctor must be able to help with the breech birth on the kitchen table of a farmhouse with grandma giving the anesthetic and the advice. Diagnose tonsillitis from diphtheria with the nearest laboratory 48 miles away. Pull the three-pronged fish hook molar of a 250-pound hired man, aided only by moonshine and faith in God, and treat everything from tarantula to rattlesnake bites with the nearest laboratory 48 miles away. Oh, that's right. Even um, stop a woman, I remember one time, from bleeding to death as we bounced up and down on a houseboat. Oh, and of course, all the while, still maintain our equilibrium when the lordly specialist sneeringly refers to us as mere general practitioners. And in addition to that, I had to deal with those who did not believe that as a woman I should be practicing medicine in the first place. Now, truth be known, most of the cracker folk had never even heard of a woman doctor when we first got there. I was quite a novelty. Folk came for miles around just to have a look at me. And I think a lot of them were disappointed in finding a woman in, well, soft feminine like clothes instead of one wearing a high stiff neck collar and dragging a monkey tail behind. Oh, there was one time I remember there was a young doctor came to town to open practice, and he had no problem, of course, with Charles Roy. But when he heard about me, oh my, oh my, he had double duck fits. He had double duck fits and stepped in each one of them. He went around bragging that he was going to, now I'm going to quote him, that he was going to run that Petticoat Doctor out of town. Oh, yeah. Well, I want you to know, I did get him to change his mind. Of course, it was only after I pumped out his stomach when he accidentally poisoned himself and saved his life. But I did get him to change his mind. It's true. Ah, so many memories. So many. You know, if I were ever to write that book, well, I think 1920 would be a chapter in and of itself. It was a banner year. We had our first graduate from Okeechobee High School, my daughter Dolly. That's right. There were only 4 in the graduating class, but she was the valedictorian. She had the highest score. She's smart. She's smart. But 1920 was also a banner year for delivering babies. I delivered 4 sets of twins that year. Well, actually, 5 if you count the neighbor's Jersey cow. That's true. Oh, there were so many. I remember a newspaper man once asked me how many babies I had delivered altogether. Truth to tell, I never kept count. Must be must be 1,000 or more. But how many altogether? I have no idea. I have kept track of many of my children since putting on their first shirts. But how many? Too many to count, as I said, but not too many to remember. Oh, as a matter of fact, many of those births I had never forgotten. Uh, I want to show you, I like this picture. You'll see here this picture right here that I'm showing you. There I am. I won. That was the one I won second place in the American Medical Association's exhibition, their art exhibition. That was sponsored by Mead Johnson and Company. at the convention that year in Atlanta. This was in 1947, and I won second prize and $1,000 for it. Courage and Devotion Beyond the Call of Duty, it was called. And I based it. I based that paint. I'm quite proud of it. On the birth of two of those twins. You see, I remember it. I remember it clearly. It was 1920, and I had been called out to the house for the woman who was in labor, and I had pulled up, as you can see, on my Model T Ford. And I'll never forget, I got out and grabbed my doctor bag, as I always did, and I was about to go up the path towards the house when all of a sudden there was a mama hen and her chicks that were just making a fuss and making a racket. And well, I have to tell you, I froze. I knew in that moment I froze because I knew it meant there was trouble. And I looked around, and sure enough, didn't take me long to see where the trouble was. If you look closely in the painting, you can see it's what we called King of the Glades. That's right. A rattlesnake that was right in front of me between the yard and the house, in the yard between the house and me. And I would have stepped right on it if it weren't for that racket that Mama Hen and the chicks were making. Well, I remember I just carefully went, grabbed a stick and threw it at it. And as soon as it crawled off, I went in and delivered the babies. You know, life was always interesting. It was wild country, but beautiful. Oh, you never knew what we were going to find. Like during the pandemic, you heard about the pandemic. Some of you might remember it. A terrible thing. The pandemic, the 1918 flu. It was something. It was terrible. It affected not just us, but everyone everywhere. But I'll tell you, this is where it was wonderful to be out traveling in the glades, where instead of still living in Jacksonville, they were hard hit in that pandemic, hard hit. Though I guess a lot of us were, and some of you might even remember wearing the mask. Remember wearing the mask? The little yes, that they worked. They really did help, but being close together like they were over in the cities, it was terrible. But I'll tell you, working then in the glades, it was wild but beautiful, and I loved to paint the glades. And I never knew what I was going to find. Not even after that pandemic. It was 1920. I'm telling you, that could be a whole chapter in and of itself. 1920, I went out. I remember I was called out to help a woman in labor. And when I got to the house, I found everybody gone except a man who had been shot, his liver blown all out and his body borne out with birdshot, and it was lying across the bedroom doorway, blocking the way. I had to move the body aside just to get inside to help the woman that was in labor. Every other soul was gone, gone. They were all hiding in the palmettos. Oh, and then there was another time. It was some year. There was a woman had been in labor and with acute malaria. I remember I was called out late one night. It was a storming night, and we had to go across on the boat. I took my Model T down to the dock, and we went. A fisherman took me out onto the lake. I'll tell you, it was so high, I thought we're never going to see land again. It took us hours. And finally, we were able to make land again. And it wasn't even the woman's husband. He was still out fishing. And he took me to the house where this woman was and left me there. And I diagnosed her with acute malaria. She had a fever of 106. She was just burning up. I worked all night trying to save that woman's life. She didn't even realize I was there for much of it. She gave birth and didn't even realize it. Unfortunately, wasn't much I could do. The baby was born stillborn. There was nothing I could do but wrap the baby up and put it on a little crate that was nearby and continue working, trying to get her fever to break and save that young woman's life. Like a little angel, she looked. When she woke up at one point and asked about the baby, I had to tell her, and she passed out again. I remember I was working so hard and I heard a noise. Now we were there by ourselves, and I looked over and I saw rats going after, trying to get to the little baby infant. Oh my gosh. I grabbed it up quick, shooed them off, and put it under the skeeter netting on the bottom of it, and worked on all night to try to save her life. Finally, I guess it was about dawn, the fever broke. The fever broke, and she started to breathe a little easier. And it wasn't until that moment that I had a moment to look down and realize that I was itching something fierce. I was itching so bad. And when I looked down, I realized that I was covered head to toes with fleas and hog lice and red bugs. I had to undress and doctor myself before I could leave. In fact, when they finally took me over, I left the thermometer and medication and told them what to do. And it was a few weeks later, a man came into the park pharmacy. I was behind the counter, and he asked for me. And I said, yeah, that's me. And he said, well, I just wanted to thank you for saving my wife. He gave me back the thermometer and the payment. And I asked how she was doing. And he said, okay. And that was it. He walked out, never said another word. You know, oftentimes I could be gone for several days at a time. And I have to tell you, I could not have done it if it weren't for without a lot of help. Not only my wonderful husband, but of course one or the other of the grandmas. My mother-in-law Emma Lindstedt, she had lived with us pretty much from the time we were married. She had been widowed young, and Roy was her only child. He had half brothers that were much older. The next oldest was, I think, 20 years older than him. And the Darrow family. Yeah, yeah. Some of you have heard about his cousin Clarence Darrow. That's the one. But you know, Roy had never even met Clarence Darrow until we moved to Florida. All that time in Chicago, he had never even met his cousin Clarence. Nope. But I always had help. My mother-in-law, Emma Darrow, I was lucky to have her. She passed away that same year, 1920. I was telling you about the age of 82. She's buried up there in Okeechobee. Oh, and of course, my mother-in-law, my mother, big grandma, that when she would come down. And oh, and we had Jim Holman. We were lucky to have Mr. Jim Holman. He was our Negro cook. I'm telling you, he spoiled me quite a bit when we were able to hire him on. He always had a hot meal waiting for me in the warming oven. And as I mentioned, I could be gone for several days at a time. And between you and me, I think he worried about me more than the others put together. Indeed, life was interesting. You just never knew who or what we were going to be dealing with. If, for example, one time Leland Rice was brought in, his jaw was clean shot off. That's right. And we had to try and stop the bleeding. He wouldn't even let us get near him. All the while, his men were pacing outside, telling about how they were going to shoot up the rest of the town if he should die. No pressure there, huh? I had to pretend to be his mama in order to get close enough just to be able to staunch the bleeding and stabilize him, enough to send him on the train the next day to the hospital in St. Augustine. I remember it was a few months after that. I was coming down the parkway in the horse and buggy. I told you people could always recognize this. And a man stepped out from the brush to wave me down, and it was Leland Rice himself. He just wanted to say thank you for saving his life to Roy and me. Not that it did much good. He was killed just a few months later robbing a bank down in Homestead. I have to say, uh, adventures, as you might call them, like that, didn't even stop even after we moved right there to Stewart. You see, Roy and I moved down to Stewart in 1922. In fact, it was while I was in Stewart. Now I was treating the Ashley Mobley gang. You've heard about John Ashley and the Up the Groves. Laura Up the Grove, his girlfriend. I didn't even know she was with John Ashley at that time, but I had known her family there in Okeechobee. But I remember we were down in Stewart. It was when John Ashley was in the Stewart jail, and his mama wanted to check on him. Remember, he had lost his eye a few years before that, uh, robbing the bank there in Stewart Bank, and I had to treat him for that, and had that false eye. And when he was in the Stewart jail, his mama was worried about him and asked if I would go in and check on him, and I did. And and then when after he escaped again, I remember being taken. Oh, I was blindfolded, so I couldn't give away their whereabouts. But I was wanting blindfolded and led about, I'd say about 10 miles or so into the glades in order to treat them. Uh, I knew exactly who they were. They were robbers and murderers. I mean, it was Mobley there in Stewart that was dressed as a young woman. Remember that one? He dressed as a young lady when they robbed the bank. But I know exactly who they were. They were murderers and robbers and worst kind of outlaws that had terrorized so much of this region. But I have to understand, I take my oath to heal very seriously. I do. I, I feel it is not my duty ever to condemn or condone, certainly, any of my patients, but simply uphold my oath to heal. Oh, and with that, I have to tell you, all those years I never had any trouble I couldn't handle, and I never carried a gun. Mm-mm. Now, it was the second summer we were there in Stewart, that Roy and I took off. We went off all across throughout the Iowa and so forth for a book company, medical book and dentistry. They had their own medical medicine and publishers out of Missouri. And we went traveling from town to town with these medical books and dental books. I have to tell you, we even had a tent that was so compact, it was wonderful. It could be packed on the running board of our car. It's true. It even had a zipper. Though I have to tell you, by the summer of 1924, it wasn't so easy to find places to camp in the cities anymore. No. Oftentimes we had found ourselves having to wait to pitch the tent and go to bed in the town park or square after the band concerts ended before we could go to bed. Well, I remember at the end of the summer, we returned and we found that Stewart, well, it was just booming. It was booming. And this is 1924, and uh, we found there was no office space to rent. Hadn't anticipated that. So we went up to visit our son, Dickie, and his wife, Ruth. Remember the one who had painted that lovely picture? And oh, of course, our little grandson, Kent. They were still up there in Okeechobee at that time. And while we were there, we ran into Will Marshall. Now, some of you might remember Will Marshall. He was Fort Lauderdale's very first mayor. So we would tell him about the problems we were having about finding a place to rent in Stewart. And I recall he said, well, we need doctors bad in Fort Lauderdale. I mean, they did have several doctors already, but the town was really growing as well. If I recall, they had a population of nearly 3,000, not quite that many, but nearly that, and they needed doctors. And he said, well, if you will come, he said, I will see to it you have office space in my own building. So we did. We went. And so I became the very first woman doctor in Broward County, and I have practiced there for many, many years. That's right. Unfortunately, Roy did not have quite so long, barely 2 years. It was fall 1926, September 1926, and Roy was not doing well. He was diagnosed with cancer of the prostate. Oh, and he had lost so much weight. In fact, that September, we went by train up to Chicago to seek some other medical advice. In fact, it was the day after our 30th wedding anniversary. It was a Friday. We left Roy up there in Chicago in the hospital, and that September 17th, Dolly and I returned. You see, she had a meeting she had to get to. She was living down in Coral Gables. She was teaching, so she was staying with a friend down in Coral Gables. She had a faculty meeting that next Saturday on the 18th, and now we heard something in the paper. We saw something, but we were traveling and about a storm. But we were just getting back and wasn't paying it much mind. I mean, we'd been through storms before, but we had no idea. Hurricane? We didn't have any idea about a hurricane. September 17th, 1926. I have to tell you, it was terrible. It was, I don't even have words. It was just terrible. A picture they'll say will express it so much better. And that's what it looked like. Such destruction and devastation. You could not believe it. Did any of you remember that were you any of you here for that hurricane? It was something. Oh, well, the wind and the noise, and in the morning, the first thing I wanted to do was go down to Miami and check on Dolly, and it wasn't easy. They had declared martial law, and you had to give a good excuse. Well, it turned out that when I got down there, I found that she'd gotten on a bus. She must have had a good excuse too. Quite a storyteller, and gotten a bus to Fort Lauderdale to check on me. Well, at least I knew if she'd gotten on a bus, she must have been okay. It was something. And we both sent word to Roy up in Chicago, before we went to look for each other. But only one of the telegrams got through. And when Roy had not heard that we were both okay, well, I don't even know if he ever checked out of the hospital. He got on a train and he came down. And when he got to our house there on Southeast 7th Street, there in Fort Lauderdale, 310 Southeast 7th Street, he found the house was filled. People were sleeping on the floor and on tables, wherever they could. You see, though we had a lot of damage, I don't think there was a place that wasn't damaged badly. But you have to understand, our house was the only one for about 3 blocks around that still had a roof on it. But it was just devastation, devastation. But truth to tell, 5 weeks later, 5 weeks to the day, Saturday, October 23rd, my own personal storm hit. Roy was not doing well. He was not doing well. He was nothing more than skin and bones and in a tremendous amount of pain. And well, Dolly had come up to visit for the weekend. And I recall exactly. She was sitting in the living room. I remember she was doing a little cross stitch on a collar. I had gone to the kitchen to prepare lunch and start getting that when all of a sudden we heard a noise. We had a bang, and I ran into the bedroom, and I don't even know. I don't know. Dolly said she heard me scream, "Oh my God!" But to be honest, I don't even remember screaming. You have to understand. You see, Roy had shot himself through the head, and he had left a note. He left a note. He said, Anna, I love you better than anything in this world. And he just couldn't bear. He couldn't bear the thought of me having to take care of him like that. He's a proud man, but he said, I love you better than anything in this world. Goodbye. I'm a strong woman, but I don't know what I would have done without Dolly. She took care of everything. She called the sheriff and made all the funeral arrangements. Roy is buried right next to his mama there in Okeechobee. And what was it Dolly said? Oh, Dolly used to call me a zombie, living dead. That's what it was, a zombie. Can you imagine? I know. And she wanted me to move to Coral Gables with her. I know she just wanted me to get away from where Roy died. I know that's what she wanted, but I just didn't want to. I needed to keep working. We had started a practice there, and I wasn't ready to. So instead, Dolly gave up her teaching position. And I know for a fact that she had been in line for a principal's position, only 23 years old, and she gave it smart. That girl is smart. But she gave it up and started working in the library. That's right, the library there in Fort Lauderdale that Ivy Stranahan had started. Well, okay. I did continue practicing medicine there in Fort Lauderdale for 25 years, and I have watched it grow. Well, I've watched it grow much as I've watched much of this beautiful state of ours grow. Now, I retired just a few years ago down to Coral Gables. There it is. I retired to in 1949, and so only about 8 years ago or so. And I'm there still in Coral Gables with my daughter Dolly. For those that were wondering, I moved most of my garden with me, and I am still painting. I am. In fact, haven't spoken with all of you tonight and remembering so much of that. Well, I guess I still have plenty of memories and maybe some more paintings to paint. And I want to thank you all for allowing me to reminisce with all of you today. It's truly been a pleasure. And I know I have been going on, and you might have some other questions. I'm going to take off our picture here. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them and chat with some of you for a few minutes. Well, thank you. Thank you so very much. I really do appreciate being allowed to reminisce with you today. I think I have some more ideas for some paintings I'm going to have to start getting doing as soon as I can. Thank you.
And we want to thank you, Dr. Anna. I do have to say, Dolly was your twin. She looked just like you in those pictures. Anybody have any
People
questions?
have said that
Yes.
oftentimes. They have.
If anybody has any questions, you can either type them in the chat or hold your spacebar down since you're muted, and you can ask Dr. Darrow, Dr. Anna, a question.
Any questions? And if anybody had questions, so that lovely, I heard she's coming back shortly, that Miss Carrie Sue Ayvar. If anybody had any other questions on it, she studied up on a lot of these things too. So if I want not able, maybe she can. So feel free to ask any of the questions, and what was it, and speak up. Never be afraid to speak your mind. Well, maybe not, but I want to thank you so much for joining us here tonight. George, did anybody, I did not see if anybody had any questions.
I don't see anybody. Remember, hold your spacebar down. There you go. For Carrie, how did you get all of the pictures? Well, we'll have to wait till Carrie comes on in order to ask
Oh,
that one, but
if you
hold
would
on
like
and
to
she'll be
ask
there.
Carrie, if there anybody has any questions for me, please feel free. If not, I'll go get Carrie, because she could tell you more about some of the pictures that I was sharing. I'd be more than happy to. And if George, if you would, because I don't see quite as well as I used to see what some of the other questions, if there are any other ones, please just say them
None other
aloud.
right now. None other right now. Elise would like to say thank
Well,
you.
oh, you're most welcome. You know what? I'll go get Miss Carrie. I think oh, she's coming right now, and she'll be able to answer that question if nobody has any other questions for me. Well, thank you all very much. Hold on one moment. I think she's coming right now.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Doc Anna. I know you had to go. You have a call to make. I understand. Even in her retirement, she's always staying busy. That's exactly right. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Carrie Sue Ayvar, and I am a Chautauqua scholar, which means I get to do all the research as well as to tell the story. I'm a professional storyteller, and I'd be happy to tell you how I got the pictures. The photographs, I actually have, many of them are from Doc Anner's family photo book. Her son, Dickie, that you saw in the story, was an amateur photographer. And when I was researching her, I found her family. Dolly had never married. She had actually been engaged once, but then when she went to live with her mother, that eventually fell apart. And Dickie had one son, little Kent, and then, who had a child, a grandson. And the grandson had all of these old photographs. I found them living in Tucson, Arizona, because Dickie had moved with his second wife out there and then had married a third time. And I have actually been in touch with that part of the family. And the grandson didn't was going to throw away all these old black and white pictures. They weren't in great shape. Who wants these old things? The granddaughter-in-law, however, was a nurse. And she thought, I think your grandmother might have been somebody kind of important. And so she kept them. And when I got in touch with her, we spoke. She eventually sent me a box, and then later I met her in person and brought me even more of all of these photographs, notes that Anna had written, things in her own handwriting, a birthday book so I could see her handwriting and Dolly's handwriting. They used the same birthday book to see who they had kept in touch with. So it was like a detective thing. And in with it was a cassette tape of Dolly speaking, who had lived with her mother all her life, including talking about her father's suicide because she had been in that house. You can't find it in a lot of other of the paperwork, though a lot of the words that I use telling the story are actually Doc Anner's, because she did write and was asked to speak about what her life was like as a pioneer female physician on the Florida frontier. She was named Outstanding Pioneer Doctor of Florida. So that's how I got that. And her granddaughter-in-law also gave me this painting from 1956. So that's when I was choosing to tell it. And she had carried it when I met her when they were visiting here in Florida. I drove up to Orlando to meet with her. And then this and another little small oil, while I've been telling the story of Doc Anner last year, believe it or not, I've been telling her story for about 20 years. Somebody said, I have a gift for you. She came up with two of them. It's signed by her on the back, made out to Adelaide. She said, I don't know who it is. I said, but I do. It was one of the Rawlinsons. They stayed friends forever. In fact, her Adelaide's granddaughter, Zelda, just celebrated her 95th birthday last week. And I've been in touch with her too. And she remembers meeting Doc Anner at Adelaide at her grandmother's house when Anna came up to visit from Fort Lauderdale. She stayed in touch with all of them. Does anybody else have any other questions? I love these things.
How many years of research did you do on this?
That's a great question. I actually got a fellowship in 2001, 20 years ago. I got a fellowship through the Florida Humanities Council. I do one other Chautauqua program, and I was been asked to do another, and I found her story fascinating. Factually, the part that got my attention was the love story between her and Roy, and the fact that they both decided to start over with, you know, a newborn, well, not even a newborn, 8 months pregnant, and a 5-year-old. But that love that they shared, that the love story caught my attention. And then I started to research for it. So I did that with the help. I hired a historian, but then I kept asking questions. I'm very good at asking questions. And I have to tell you, I am continually finding new information. Like I found her family, that was through an online genealogical website. Somebody had a question about her husband, Roy Darrow. And so I went, there was an answer there. Well, people don't change their emails that often. This is like 20 years ago. And I decided to write. And then I got the phone number and we started to talk. And then I met the granddaughter-in-law. I met some of the other people, and I talked to people who actually knew her. I talked to a young man who at the time was young, elderly when I knew him, who knew her in Fort Lauderdale. And I had already done a year's worth of research at that time when I heard about him, and I found his phone number and called him. He was now living in Okeechobee, I think in large part because he was inspired by Doc Anner. As a young man, a teenager, he worked in the seed and feed store where she went every day in Fort Lauderdale to buy food for the birds. She loved to feed the birds as well as to paint them, and her garden. And he told me that she was quite a storyteller, and he would get in trouble because she would be telling about her days crossing the Everglades, living in Okeechobee, and some of the early years there in Fort Lauderdale, and he would forget to work and get in trouble. He said she was quite a storyteller, and that she had never met a stranger. She just liked people. And it brought my attention to her that she treated everybody of every race and background as people. This was a white woman traveling across in the early part of this century, of the last century, and it was very unusual. And she did get a lot of, even she and her husband, but Roy, get a lot of not such good memories sometimes. Roy was actually nearly lynched when he set out to prevent a lynching. He did prevent it, but it almost cost him his life too. So I've been researching it, and I still do, because I still find new stories. There's now things that are now available online that weren't available. There was, for years, I knew that she had written an article for the Florida Journal of Medicine. I knew the number of it, but I couldn't get the actual copy. I got excerpts from it. Well, because now have things available online, I actually have a copy of the entire magazine and the article that she wrote in her own words. So I have additional stories for all of this and more time than it takes to tell them.
That's awesome. Um, how much research did you do on her time, since we're here in Stewart, on her time that she lived in Stewart?
Well, part of it is I keep finding more things out about it. It was, though she only lived in Stewart 2 years, and that last summer she was actually traveling. She actually had traveled down there before she lived there. Partly, and then I think that's one of the reasons they ended up moving there. Okeechobee did not become the state capital. And even though it started booming in 1915, by 1922, it was not doing as well as they hoped. And that's why they moved to Stewart. But she'd been to Stewart before. She actually traveled a great distance when you're thinking about in the 20s, in the teens. She would go all the way out from Okeechobee out to Indiantown. She would go out to Stewart. And part of the thing that happened in Stewart, again, with the Ashleys, when he was in the jail before he escaped again, it was his mama that had asked Doc Anner, please, would you go and check and give him a tonic? He's not doing well in there. And she did. She traveled all over, and oftentimes would be gone for several days. And if she was crossing the glades, it might, let's say, for example, in that horse and buggy, it got dark. It was too dark to travel. You couldn't see anything. She would just stop and camp overnight where she was and then continue on the next day. So I love doing the research. Her time in Stewart, though it was only 2 years, she had quite a few interesting adventures, shall we say. And meanwhile, she never carried a gun throughout all of that time. And the interesting thing is with John Ashley, which really was there in Stewart, that she had those experience, more of them, like being taken out into the glades. That was when she was living in Stewart. Ironically, he became infamous, shall we say, by killing DeSoto tiger, a Seminole. And that was part of, she was literally adopted into the Seminole tribe, or the Cow Creek Indians, which is that branch that she first knew of.
I read where her practice was on top of the Davis uh, department store, and I know there's two department stores still in Stewart standing from a long time ago in the downtown area. I'm wondering if that's one of them. I'll have to do a little research on that.
If you do, I would love to find out. I don't actually know her address in Stewart. So if anybody knows, I am still finding out new things. So please email me. I would love, if you find out where it was. I know where she lived in Fort Lauderdale, because she lived there for many years. Not only does she live there, that's where her practice was. 310 Southeast 7th. So if anybody finds out about it there in Stewart, because I don't know where she practiced in Stewart. I'd love to know, or where she lived.
What I found was it was on Flagler, which is broken up now into different pieces, but I'll see what I can find out.
I would love it if you do. One of the things I really love, I love telling her story. This woman still inspires me to this day, but I also really love adding more and more to the pieces of it. I do have more stories, and sometimes depending on where I tell the story, because I've told it around the United States, I will add in some of those other stories that I just don't have time to tell.
Very cool. I live on the old city dump in Stewart, and I've collected numerous medicine bottles that have come up through the dirt. I'm wondering if any of them were hers.
I wouldn't be surprised. They might be some of hers. She was known for it because she carried always her big doctor bag, but she carried that pharmacological case with her as well that was filled with all those medicine bottles. But she carried, amongst all of them, change for $100, and people knew about it, but she never felt threatened. She just knew that she was going to make sure that she had changed and not get shortchanged herself again.
Well, that was awesome. This is a fantastic talk. Thank you. Thank Dr. Anna for us.
I will thank Doc
If
Anna for you.
anybody,
Thank you all very much for joining us tonight. It's been a pure pleasure.
all right, everybody, thank you. And don't forget to support your friends of the Martin County Library System so we can have more events like
It
this.
wouldn't happen if it weren't for that. And Doc Anna wants to say the same thing because her daughter Dolly worked for the Fort Lauderdale Library when it was just starting out too. And if it weren't for the friends, none of these programs could be even possible. So
Very
thank you
true.
very much. And by the way, can I say one other thing?
Sure, sure.
That bookstore that you were talking about at the library, one of my favorites. It's one of the things that I have actually really missed this year is of doing everything virtually. I used to always in my travels find myself whenever I could stopping by your library and checking out all those wonderful books. So I've supported it for years and hope to do so again in the
Awesome.
future. It's true.
Very good. All right. Anything else?
Not for me. Thank you all very
Very
much
good.
for joining us.
It was a great talk. Thank you so much. Have
You're
a
welcome.
wonderful time, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.